This program has been brought to you thanks to the generous contributions of our patrons on Patreon. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. And for more content like this, be sure to check out the Modern Alchemist channel on Patreon. Greetings, and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Alchemy After Hours Rubedo. Tonight's topic, Human Alchemy 101 and Emotional States. Yesterday, we had a really good office hours, and I was really excited about seeing once again the synergy that exists when our minds are drawn together. It doesn't seem to matter where we are if we're all in one spot. Even, geography, physical geography on planet Earth doesn't seem to matter as much as temporal geography, meaning that regardless of what time of day it happens to be, we all happen to be there together. And as such, our consciousness seems to interconnect in such a way that questions often seem to have a theme. And as you go back over the months that we've been doing this together, you'll see that the idea of the questions being themed out appear again and again and again. And to me, I find this exciting, and I don't necessarily have an explanation that I can articulate in full as to how or why this happens, other than we are cohabitating within a particular temporal geography. So, as part of that discussion yesterday, the first question started with Marty, and he was asking about the importance of emotion within the framework of a magical operation. So, in the case of the question as posed by Marty, the root or the crux of it was, how important are emotions in terms of one's working or one's intent, a magical operation. And it is my feeling, it's my experience, that one's emotional state is of utmost importance, and that being able to draw upon or manage one's emotional state is the crux upon which one's success or failure is balanced. So, and what I mean by that is that your emotional state can be the energy or fuel necessary to push through a difficult time, or it can provide the entropy that one must overcome in order to get started. Either way, the emotional state of the person in question is of key importance, and it is really important that we understand and accept that there is one truth involved in our existence as human beings that can be relied upon, and that is that we are emotional beings. We're not emotionally driven. We are the embodiment of emotion. We are. It's every experience that a human being has involves an emotional state. And the thing that is fascinating to me is that it is through the amygdala that memory is tied to one's emotional state. So overall, one's memory, regardless of how scaled up or down one's emotional state might be, is still translated through an organ that ties consciousness to emotion as a mechanism for access and storage. And that, to me, plus so much more about just our own physiology, and I'm not going into other life forms on the planet. We're just talking about us, because as you extend this outwards, you'll find that there is a truth that exists, that seems to exist throughout all conscious entities relating to emotion. We as human beings might interpret things, and a lot of sociologists might suggest that we are anthropomorphizing an animal's emotional state And yet those of us who cohabitate with animals on a regular basis, those who deal with their care, maintenance, and training, can certainly tell you that an animal has a conscious state that is founded, as is our own, in their emotional well-being, so that an animal which is frightened will wind up becoming sickly, just as a human being who's constantly under tension and fear will find themselves physiologically becoming increasingly sick. The idea then is that at our core, there is a swirling layer of emotion, like a film or a bubble, a film on a soap bubble. And that is, it swirls and seethes. It can grow larger or be reduced depending upon the pressure that is inside of it, right? So as the bubble increases, and that, of course, that pressure inside of it has a corresponding relationship to the actual physical pressure outside of it, right? So as the pressure increases on the outside, the bubble contracts. And as the pressure decreases on the outside, the bubble expands. And what's amazing about this analogy is that this is exactly corresponds. This physical correspondence of external and internal pressures corresponds to one's emotional state. Because you can track your emotional state and recognize that people who have reduced physical pressures then are able to expand, right? They're able to actually expand outward. And those who are under intense physical pressure withdraw and pull inward, just as the bubble contracts. So it just, to me, and then of course the pressure within the bubble has to correspondingly relate to the pressure outside. So by virtue of its own creation. So as it contracts, the pressure inside the bubble intensifies until it reaches a point where the outside pressure can't compress it any further, right? And the thing that is the most fascinating about this is that too much pressure one way or another will break the bubble. So that if there isn't enough pressure on the outside of the bubble, it will expand to the point that it pops. And if there's too much pressure on the outside pushing in, then the bubble will be compressed until it pops. It just, and you can see the same relationship with a person. Now, the mitigating influence through all of this that is going on is the mind. And it is the mind that it rests above the surface of the bubble like as an additional layer, like clouds over the planet Earth. This layer that moves here and there and is never complete over the entirety of the surface, but will aggregate as its attention is drawn from one point to another. So you can have a swirling bubble of emotional states, but only certain areas of one's emotional state will have a canopy of cloud cover, which is paying attention to it and working to comprehend that emotional state. So, which, if you wish to take this analogy then one step farther, one can see a relationship between one's unconscious state, one's conscious state, and then one's superconscious state, which is that pressure, that field within which one's mind and one's emotions exist. So then there's a larger framework that is containing our little bubble and the atmosphere just out on the surface of that bubble, right? The cloud cover over the bubble. And that superstructure then is a component of the superconsciousness, the greater mind, which allows all of us to interact with each other on a basis relating to, by extension, all things which are then connected to us. So, but going back to the mind then, the mind is that structure within ourselves, within our conscious state, that allows us to appraise and comprehend what it is that we are experiencing. and it requires focus. One's emotional state is diffuse. One's mind brings things into focus. Our emotional states are what allow us to appraise ourselves as being alive, because we feel, we're visceral, we have desires, we have things about ourselves that exceed thought. They're just there, and they're impulses and drives. And unless we draw our mind to those areas and seek to understand them, we'll never understand the greater aggregate of what's pushing us forward and making us do the things we do. We'll never be able to take advantage of an energy within ourselves that allows us to succeed. And we'll never be able to understand those energies within ourselves which are dragging us back, preventing us from obtaining the success we desire. The Star Wars analogy that I love is when Luke is confronted with the Emperor, and he says that he can feel the anger.
I can feel your anger. It gives you focus.
That it gives him focus, and this is true. This is an example, and the reason why I want to talk about anger now is because anger is really maligned. We are really uncomfortable with the idea of people being angry, and we're really uncomfortable with the idea of being angry ourselves. And I think the reason for this is multifold. That one of the first things is that once a person has submitted to their anger and becomes angry, and I believe that there is a conscious point of transition where it may be just on the fringe of their waking conscious state, but there is a moment, I submit to you, there is a moment where every person has that pulse, that beat, and they're like, do I do this or do I not do this? And they're like, screw it. Boom, and then they hit someone, or they break something, or they say something, and it's because they decided to give themselves permission to release their emotional state, which is typified as anger. And then the consequence of that anger is often not considered by most. And this is where the difference lay. Are you being controlled by your anger? When you let go, are you just like a piece of flotsam and you're just tossed about and you've lost all control? We all know that there are people like this. I was raised by one. My mother would go into histrionics, and she wouldn't be happy until everybody was upset. and then suddenly it was like that would sate her anger need, her whatever need it was, but it was horrible. And with her, she just would get carried away. She's just this passionate woman that would just completely lose herself to the flow of emotion and just be in that, and the consequences be damned. And so we all have seen people like this. It's the substance of stories and romance novels and tragedies. And then there is an alternative. The alternative is to be aware that that state exists, but instead of allowing it to just be a blur, a haze, a nondescript outpouring of emotional ferocity, instead of it being that way, you use the mind as a lens. The mind becomes a lens that allows you to bring focus to an issue and evaluate it. And if it seems right, then use the anger that has been elicited and allow it to be tempered by one's mind so that it gives you focus. Because sometimes anger can give you this clarity that is extraordinary. It can be the thing and you've often heard me reference this in other videos where, I say you draw upon this force, this field and of resistance, and you say this far and no farther. You do your Jennifer Lopez and say, enough. and then it allows you to have the bedrock and the substance to pursue something. Now, there comes a transition point. There comes a transition point where it seems as if you lose your anger. If you continue to use it in this way, when you use it in such a way where you are objectively, consciously evaluating why you are angry and how that really makes you feel, what is the next thing that you feel after the anger? What is it that you think after that? As you use your mind to evaluate that, and you find more often than not the foundation, the seed bed of your anger is a kind of attention to self, a form of narcissism, ego, the kind of you that you recognize objectively is not the kind of you that you feel you are, right? That it's something that you transform into, but it's not the person you present all the time, not the person you feel you are all the time. When you are confronted with that again and again and again, and you realize that because of your sense of self, because of your selfishness, your ego, your pride, you have caused harm to others, and you have reached a point where you don't want to hurt people anymore, where the idea of just hurting someone, it doesn't work for you, then you'll find that your anger will start to ease, because your desire to not hurt people means that you want to understand them. And by understanding them, you realize, hey, we're not all so different after all. And when you're looking around and you're looking at all these other people, it is important to recognize you'll reach this point where you no longer assume that they are conscious of everything that they're doing. Because you know that you have been at a point where you were not conscious of all that you were doing, all that was driving your feelings, your emotional states, all the things which would rouse you to a state of anger, a state of uncontrolled anger. Because regardless of who you are, it is my belief, based on my experience, regardless of who you are, you will never free yourself entirely from being human. You're going to get angry. There are going to be things that will come out and surprise you about yourself. There will be things where you have placed a line within your own mind, within your own consciousness, that you may or may not have been aware of. And that this line is rarely ever disturbed until the time that it is. And then you see a new side of yourself. And so anger can give one focus. We certainly know that there are scriptural texts that describe people who are otherwise considered godly or saintly or in some ways superior becoming anger, and that this was a righteous anger, meaning that objectively there are certain things that just are not done. And the difference between that and everyone else is restraint, is using the mind as the lens necessary to give you the focus so that you are not overcome by it, but that it is the fuel that can drive you forward if the going needs to get done and the tough need to get going. Then that's the fuel that you use to get that work accomplished. This is the human transmutation. This is that aspect of the self that is done instantaneously once you are aware of it, but cannot be done instantaneously without first preparing yourself for it. And what that means is that you need to, in meditation, use this concept as the construct for your thought processes and your explorations. Meaning that the next time that you sit down for 10 minutes, 15, 20, 60 minutes, whatever length of meditation that you choose to use, and contemplate your emotional states. Contemplate the last time you can remember getting truly angry, and ask yourself, when was it that you chose to lose restraint? When was it that you chose to restrain yourself? And how did that feel? What was the difference in the feeling of being restrained and not being restrained? Did you have a sense of command over yourself? A sense of elevation by recognizing on the one hand that you are just seething with anger, and on the other, you are not allowing that to overcome you, but instead are using that at that moment, at that time, to focus your intellect. Anger is something, to me, that is like a combat reflex. It's the thing that the mind uses to alert itself to a situation. It is the ultimate mirror, meaning that when you have someone or something that evokes a sense of anger within you, that is telling you about yourself more than it is necessarily telling you about the other person, because you've just discovered your hot button. You've just discovered the field that you need to work in and clear, so that you can cultivate that field and yourself into something better, something more productive than just allowing it to run wild and allow all sorts of things to inhabit it, right? That's the goal. To me, as an alchemist, as a magician, that's the goal. The final thing that I would like you to take away would be this, that this part of yourself is the part of you that you will be confronted with when you are projecting your consciousness into other realms, other places. I have often told other students there is absolutely nothing to fear out there except for yourself. That's it. If you have some stuff within you that you've repressed, feelings within you, fears within you that you have kept hidden from even yourself. And there are those things that we don't even want to think about, that relate to ourselves and what we do and how we feel and how we are. And those are the things that will be confronted. Those are the things that will confront you when you're moving through the record, through those dark places. Because all of those spaces are built on the same kinds of emotional frameworks that we experience. It's just that we, like our vision, like our vision, which is really limited, right? We only see a small spectrum of light relative to all that is available to be seen. So it is with the aspect of emotion consciousness, that we are capable of only perceiving a very small spectrum of it, and that this goes on in ways that exceed our capacity to comprehend, that exceed our capacity to understand. It just is, just as we just are. So I hope that this has helped you guys, and I hope that you learn to not fear being an emotional person. We're not Vulcans here. Our job is not to suppress our emotion. It has been found again and again and again that those who repress or suppress their emotional states wind up having to deal with that baggage on the back end. It just is. And that can wind up surfacing in ways and at times that you least expect. So it is far better to explore it, to pursue it, to become the hunter instead of the hunted, right? Don't fall prey to your emotional states. Take charge. Pursue them because they are yours. The quarry that you are seeking is you, what you are. And the greatest challenge, your greatest challenge is to embrace yourself, to love yourself, and to forgive yourself. To recognize that just as you have these kinds of frailties, so does everybody else, regardless of their economic station or the country they live in or the religions that they happen to practice. All of us are the same in regard to the fact that we are human beings who feel, who love, who hate, who fear, who rejoice, who despair, and who have hope. These emotional states define what we are because they are what drive us, what make us succeed, and what may cause us to languish in failure. And it is only when we go after it, really go after it, and do so without fear, that we are able to really become who we are, to actualize our full potential as alchemists, as magicians, and as human beings.